in the previous episode, we were wondering how can we bring about a thought revolution, and particularly among the youth, in terms of value education and the values helping us to bring about a change in the mindset of the people. And hoping against hope that something can be really achieved, or something can be sought to curb this rampant menace of rape. So the center point here again comes in, how do you curb or how do you restrain male sexuality, which is by nature very aggressive, which is creating a lot more problems. And this is something which is nature driven, or the whole building of the human body and all of that. So I would like to know, Dr. Valson Thampu, what you think that just giving these value in education, etc., you think this will have an impact on this type of recurring rapes and all of that crime, which is heartrending? Young girls and our daughters are being subjected to this inhuman type of treatment.
Yeah, Swamiji, I think the very first thing we need to recognize is that in the last, say, half a century, all over the world, there has been a shift from love to lust. Now, for whatever reasons, people think that they have a right to indulge in lust, and if this is obstructed or not allowed, they think that their freedom is compromised. So in psychology, this is called a sense of underprivilege. The second thing is that morally, the indulgence in lust has been socially also sanctioned. There was a time when people used to feel that this was a very wrong thing. Now we say it's a natural thing. जैसे बोलते हैं ना, यदि लड़के हैं तो ऐसे करते हैं. कभी कभी हमारे नेता लोग भी कहते हैं कि हाँ, लड़के ऐसे करते हैं. So हम ही नहीं बोलते कि लड़कियाँ करते हैं. So we sort of accept and rationalize or legitimize this indulgence in lust. Now, lust and love are mutually exclusive. You cannot love if you are lustful. If you are capable of loving, you will not be lustful. Right. Now, the second thing is, in our olden attitude to life, we accepted the fact that everything had its appropriate place. Human sexuality has its appropriate place. Sports has its appropriate place. Family relationship, public relationship, work, worship, religion, politics, all had its appropriate places in life. What has happened now is that the limits ascribed to these various activities have been removed. So, for example, the age at which even children indulge in sex has been considerably lowered. I remember a study conducted by All India Institute of Medical Science in the late 1980s, which found out that 54% of children in Delhi studying in classes 11 and 12 and in the best schools were already sexually active. Now that's a very, very major finding. So 54% is a huge percentage. So now in olden days, for example, if you think of Swami Vivekananda, Vivekananda talked about the conversion of sexual energy into spiritual energy. I'm very much in favor of that view. For example, we are all human, we all experience sexual impulse. Now, in my experience, the best way that I have found for myself, a couple of things. First thing, I think of my dear ones, how they should be treated by others. The second thing I remember is what my mother taught me, that I have to keep my body pure. The third thing that helps me a lot is developing a very strong intellectual interest. Because when you expend your energy, intellectual work takes a lot of energy. Then there's a diversion of energy from lust to a more dignified, productive and personally enriching avenue of expression. Now, if you don't have any of these things, and if you think that you have a right to have the maximum amount of pleasure through lust, then you actually go mad. So I think these are the
Well, whatever examples you gave of yourself or some saintly figures like Vivekananda, whoever, these are exceptions.
Yes.
And exceptions only prove the rule. The problem is, generally speaking, we find, you spoke about the olden times, and you said that these were some values, family values, this, that, and lust was duly restrained, etc. But that was also the age when there was so much of sexual repression. I'm not saying, I'm not holding any license for lustfulness. And yet, this sexual repression was also something very harmful for human mind and human body also. And we have heard enough about this Victorian era, Puritanism, etc. And they went to the extent of this, our Indian Penal Code. Thomas Babington Macaulay introduced this section 376, that even among married couple, sex has to be in the order of nature, whatever he meant by it. Now, all of these things smack of sexual repressive culture. And now today, in this age of internet, and where pornography is so very endemic or everywhere. So how do you propose to curb this type of a lustful life and not, but it should have love but not lust. It's a very thin line which separates the two, where and how one starts and other stops. So this is like, the greed. Greed has got glorified in this scheme of globalization. Similarly, market forces, the same globalization, greed forces, they are promoting lust because it sells and people enjoy whatever pleasure you are talking about. The media has a big
let
role
me take
to
up
play.
the very important thing you mentioned, because it's important that we have clarity on this.
Yes.
You see, you talked about the harm that sexual repression does to human beings, and it is true, and I'm aware of that problem. Psychologists have written a great deal about it, since Sigmund Freud. But it's equally true that promiscuous sex does a great deal of harm to the human person. So we want neither sexual repression nor sexual promiscuity. We want a balanced understanding and enjoyment of human sexuality. Now, when we talk about balance, we actually imply that there is another consideration to sexuality. See, sexuality can be understood purely in terms of pleasure. The West understands sexuality largely in terms of pleasure. But it is this pleasure-seeking attitude that degraded love into lust. But that's not the only thing about sexuality. Sexuality has this very great and most important function of perpetuating the species. It is a generational principle, generative principle. Now that is a great experience, because it is in this principle that you actually participate in a divine process of creating life. I mean, I cannot think of anything more spiritually profound than this experience of a man and a woman coming together and becoming the medium for a new life to come into being.
Yes.
But unfortunately, if this itself has been devalued. Now, for example, in urban societies and in contexts where pleasure seeking is maximized, you find an aversion to family. You actually find an aversion to children. Those who want to seek pleasure as their greatest goal in life, they do not want children. In fact, a lot of abuse of medicine takes place because of the aversion to children. The children mean responsibility.
Yeah, liability.
Liability. Therefore, the point I'm making is that if we want to practice any God-given gift, whether it is music, whether it is the ability to speak, whether it is sexuality, whether it is creativity, there has to be a counter principle. Just as we walk on two legs, we need another principle to keep it in balance. That principle was...
Shall we call it self-restraint?
Not only self-restraint.
Sanyam Sadachar, जिसको बोलते हैं. Not that other extreme.
See,
जो church ने या हमारे कई लोगों ने.
See, the problem with talking about self-restraint today is that it gets mixed up with sexual repression. So I would call it a responsible exercise of human sexuality.
That means self-restraint.
But you know, the word restraint is horribly misunderstood. That's my problem.
No,
in effect, that's what it means. See, restraint with respect to a purpose. You see, very often when we talk about restraint, it is merely saying no. But a responsible exercise for sexuality is saying no and saying yes at the same time. Saying no to an irresponsible indulgence in sex and saying yes to life. So it is this balance that is missing from today's scenario, and once this balance is gone, people will become berserk. For example, if you're walking on the road, you step on a banana peel, then you have a violent fall. What happened is that you lost your balance. So your behavior thereafter, if you really take a photograph of it, it will look like a case of extreme madness. So what we need is preserving the equilibrium of life and not allow this wonderful gift of human sexuality become a means for upsetting the balance of life.
No, but when you are talking all of this, you are targeting the individual sense of balance.
And responsibility, yes.
What do you prescribe in terms of a whole society? How do we create that condition, social, political, economic conditions, cultural conditions, by which all young men and women sort of, or religious things?
Yeah, you know, Freud, because we are discussing this, Freud talked about the conflict between pleasure principle and reality principle, right? Now, pleasure principle is located in the individual. The individual is by and large driven and motivated by pleasure, right? Whereas the social domain is full of reality principle. So, it is important that the social domain holds within itself certain checks and balances, right? For example, the idea that your freedom must end where the other person's nose begins. The idea that you should do to others what you would like them to do to you.
Well, does that apply to sexuality?
Yes, of course, absolutely.
What
it must.
would have others done unto you?
Yes.
Many.
Who would like to be raped? Who would like to be?
Many male rapists, would say yes, 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 I would like to be raped. So
No,
I'm just
no. They wouldn't like the slightest inconvenience to happen to them. They would not like to be handled rough. You see, rape is what? Rape is unilateral violence. All right.
Yeah.
It's not just a matter of some sexual contact.
Yeah, yeah.
It is violence.
Violence.
So, no, who likes violence to be practiced
Yeah,
on you?
yeah.
So there are certain societies throughout the ages have worked in terms of certain prescriptions, certain don'ts, certain taboos, certain restraints. Now, unfortunately, because of the consumerist pleasure-seeking culture, all those restraints and taboos have been discredited.
Yeah.
So now the individual stands alone saying that I want to have unlimited pleasure at any cost. It doesn't matter how many people I hurt and destroy. I must have my full share of pleasure. Now you create a mad society.
But at the same time, don't you think it also creates conditions where individuals realize the consequences of this freedom and thereby start taking responsibility? Earlier, responsibility was something thrust upon by elders, religions, things like that, outside. And now,
Yes.
as we grow,
Ideally,
hopefully, yeah.
ideally what you're saying is right.
Yeah.
But on the ground, that's not what happens. Because one thing I want to tell all young people, with all the force at my command, is this, that sex is most addictive. Is as addictive as drug is or alcohol is, right? And therefore, this idea that young people can experiment as long as they want and they'll get fed up and then they'll become responsible, I think is very good in theory, but in practice it is fraught with very serious dangers.
Yes.
And also, since I've been in the field of education, higher education for 40 years, I must tell you that students, young people who cannot manage their sexuality with a certain degree of restraint and responsibility have their intellectual life completely ruined. Completely ruined. I cannot tell you what a danger it is. So anybody who tries to sort of legitimize this or justify this or romanticize this or give it a color of modern cultural liberation, I think is misleading the youth. They are paving the way for their destruction. Especially the Indian youth today is tremendously talented. And I would like the promise in them to be fulfilled for the greater good of the society and the country. And
But Valsan ji,
thank you.
You must also sort of accept or concede this fact that just like alcoholism,
Yes.
once you are under the influence of alcoholism, you are just carried away. Similarly, this sexual urge,
You lose control over yourself.
you lose control.
Yes.
And this alcohol is something which you can control from outside forces. But sexual urge is something inborn.
Yes.
By God, by nature, by something. And that, how do you curb that, or how do you restrain that, how do you channelize that energy for some more creative purpose, etc., etc. That's really a big challenge, and all of that, what you are suggesting, is easier said than done. So this is where
in Indian spirituality, human life was understood in terms of 4 stages, right?
Yes.
Now, Brahmacharya has its very, very important place in human development,
Exactly.
isn't it?
Exactly.
Gandhiji practiced Brahmacharya when he was preparing for a great cause in his life. So, for a person who is living only for himself and his pleasure, this idea of restraining oneself may sound very unacceptable. But for a person who has a sense of larger destiny, a sense of something to be done in life, a sense of preparing oneself for making some contributions to one's society or leading a meaningful life, these things are not so difficult.
Yeah.
So I think we need to affirm the fact that while this is difficult...
Can we establish it?
Yes.
Scientifically, I am saying.
Yes.
Again,
Yes. Yes.
Because the present day youth,
Yes.
if given some scientific assertion,
Yes.
then maybe they will take it seriously. The scientific assertion has to be that the sex energy,
Yes. Yes.
either way you spend it, or you
Transmute
channelize it,
transmute it.
yeah, transmute it.
Yes.
And if that could be scientifically established, because Swami Dayanand Saraswati
Yeah.
also prescribes this thing.
Yes.
He says कि ब्रह्मचर्य से
Yes.
जो ऊर्जा होती है
Yes.
वो
Exactly.
विवेक को बुद्धि को बहुत
Yes.
ऊंचा उठाती है.
Yes.
It becomes very very creative.
Yes.
You know. So
Now here I
and
also.
for that he also prescribes in a way
Huh.
that one has to be busy. You know, socially
Yes, one
active, बहुत ज़्यादा.
energy has to be properly employed.
Yes,
Now,
yes.
I want to introduce another concept now.
Yeah.
We have discussed the idea of channelizing energy.
Yes.
Now, equally important is the need to cultivate higher tastes.
Yes.
For example, if you read a classic book, a book that makes you think, then your attitude to pleasure seeking activities changes. Suppose you listen to a fantastic rendering of an Indian raga.
Yeah.
Okay, then you have a certain state of mind. From there you go and listen to a lustful, prurient, filmy song. Choli ke piche kya hai? है ना? Then your attitude changes very completely.
Yeah.
You understand? So, I think as a society we must continually affirm that it is a far more sensible, it's a wiser thing to cultivate higher tastes
Yes, yes.
than to sink into lower and animal-like
Yes.
tastes. For example, an animal cannot contain its sexuality.
Yeah.
An animal's sexual behavior is seasonal, right? The moment
By
the heat,
nature it is.
by nature. So when an animal is in heat, there's no question of controlling it.
Yeah.
Now, are we saying that human beings are only like animals who cannot have any control over their sexual activities?
At least they are controlled seasonally.
They are controlled
whatever.
seasonally.
But here, human beings,
Absolutely indiscriminate,
indiscriminate.
and utterly inconsiderate.
Yes.
Thrust it upon anybody you like.
Yes.
Now, I think as a society we have to say that this is not natural, this is completely unnatural, it is harmful to everyone concerned. We have to say that sexuality is the greatest privilege that human beings can have on this earth. I believe it is a God-given privilege, it's the profoundest privilege of all. Therefore, the degree of responsibility with which this has to be accepted and enjoyed and employed
Yes.
must be very, very high. Very high.
And the first and foremost thing has to be
Yes.
respect for the other.
Respect for the other.
That other person,
Yes.
has to be regarded as something divine, something very sacred.
Yes.
You just cannot force yourself upon
Yes.
anybody.
If you have a sister, if you have a mother, if you have a daughter, how can you, leave alone rape somebody, how can you even look at a woman lustfully? If you love them, if you love your child, your daughter, if you love your sister, if you love your mother, how can you actually, ill-treat, practice sexual cruelty on somebody?
Yes. Unthinkable, abominable, I would say.
Absolutely.
Yes,
So,
it's really.
and I want to place my faith and state my faith in the youth of India that if given the proper guidance, they will be able to manage their sexuality aright. Unfortunately, because of this open sky policy and the invasion of Indian airspace as well as domestic space by media, the idea, the Western cultural notions have invaded us and it's really destroyed our foundations.
The Western societies are suffering far more rape cases than
Yes.
India.
Yes. Yes.
This is strange.
No.
We are worried about the Indian situation,
Yes.
but when you look at the statistics, the freer the society is, like, rape is happening at a much bigger rate.
Yes, Swamiji, let me share a personal experience. 1994, I was invited to address the first Pan-African AIDS Conference in Uganda, Kampala, Uganda. It was convened by President Museveni of Uganda. Now, 5 speakers were invited from 5 different continents. I was the speaker from Asia. The speaker from America was my next door neighbor in Hilton, in Kampala. Now, I still remember him. His name was Stephen. Now, we were sitting together at meal in that hotel, and I found that he was, you see, throughout the day we were listening to the experiences of AIDS victims, right?
Yes.
All right, now this man was not eating, so I said, now, Stephen, why don't you eat? What's the problem? You know what he told me? He said, Valson, back home, I have a 14-year-old daughter. She's my only child. Tonight, I do not know where she will be and whether her life is in danger or not.
My goodness.
Then he said, I still remember his words. He said, in the 60s, we created a great society. We were very excited about it. But today, I'm scared to think that my daughter has to grow up in this society. This is the heartbreak of a father.
Yes.
He was barely 42, 43.
Yeah.
No. Now this is the reality. People are not looking at. We are not achieving anything for ourselves or for humankind by allowing the same tragedy to invade us.
Yeah.
Before it becomes too late, let's learn the lessons from the tragedy of the West and believe that as human beings, we have the power to control at least ourselves.
Yes. Yes. And do you think this whole idea of God's presence, God sort of guiding us every moment of our life, can play some restraining role?
Swamiji, I want to remember my mother.
Yes.
When I was 8 or 9 years old, she was very ill all the time, dying inch by inch. But one day, she put her hand on my head and said, son, your body is given to you by God. Keep it pure.
Wow.
That's all she said. She said it only once.
Yes.
Do you know that I've never forgotten it?
Yes.
Never in my life.
Yes.
So this one thing strengthened me on many occasions. Many occasions. Against, collapsing into in temptations. So I believe that these things are very powerful.
Yes.
So a sense of godliness, a sense of, and the sense of purity about your own body, your own life that emerges from it.
Yes.
I think these are very powerful things.
Bahut acha. So let's conclude it that let us look for some more scientific evidence where the sexual energy can be channeled for more creative purposes.
Yes.
Like Swami Dayanand says, Vichar Agni ka indhan ho jata hai.
Yes.
It becomes a fuel for
Absolutely.
thought
Yes.
revolution, something like that. Vichar Agni.
Yes.
So that's one thing. Second is to bring about a little balance between pleasure seeking, lust, and also the respectful love, responsible love.
Yes.
No? So in this way, perhaps addressing this question culturally, socially, spiritually will be far more rewarding than just relying on the courts and the laws and police and this and that. So this is high time in a country like India. Our policymakers also think of introducing some values in education system.
Exactly.
And generally, we should not just let loose this materialistic, consumeristic.
I think, Swamiji, together we must also appeal to the media, not only to not propagate the consumerist, pleasure-seeking, sex-crazy ideas and stories, but also to cater to the social, mental health of our people by talking about the nobler things of life, by affirming and celebrating the goodness and the sanctity of life, and particularly by encouraging young people to take better care of themselves. The media can play a very constructive role. They can make a great contribution to creating a healthy society. And let's hope that our heart breaking appeal
Yes.
will not go in waste as far as the Indian media is concerned.
Great. Thank you so much. That's the only way we can stop this hedonistic culture.
Yes, absolutely.
It's being reduced
Yes.
every day
Yes.
to more and more of hedonism.
Yes.
This cannot be called progress or development or
Yeah.
by any other name.
Yes.
So thank you so much.